This is the separation of the components of a mixture lab. Here are the different pieces of lab equipment, and over on the left there in that little green bottle is the unknown. So we are set, so let's get started. Here is the unknown for the lab. It's unknown number 1. It contains unknown amounts of ammonium chloride, sodium chloride, and sand. We will weigh the beaker, the 150 ml beaker. So zero it. That's the mass. And because this was made up especially for this lab, here's the only lab technique we need to have for the transferring the unknown. Normally it's a little more involved. That is the amount that we were given. That goes into the beaker. Now we weigh the beaker and the unknown. And knowing what the mass of the beaker was, we can subtract that off and find out the mass of the unknown that we start with. So here's our Bunsen burner. We're going to get this going. So I take the striker and turn on the gas and get it going there. Yeah, I think you can see that. And we'll put it under here. And actually, we'll get the beaker on there first. Hold on. You can see the flame is on here, and it's touching the bottom. We want it to hit and just kind of spread out on the bottom. The beaker's ready here. Nothing has happened yet, but we should start to see the fuming of the ammonium chloride as it sublimates. Let's see if that will happen here. If not, we'll pause. You can also see I have the flame off to the side because the fume hood is pulling on it. Oh, there we go. You can see that now. Alright, it's been heating for about 2 minutes. You can see that white smoke is the ammonium chloride changing from solid directly to gas. The fume hood is drawing that off. So we can go back a little bit here and see. And we're going to let that go for about 10 minutes and see how much of it will go in that time. And then we're going to weigh it after that. So this is after about 10 minutes, and I've been using the crucible tongs to turn it around and doing the little flamethrower trick. And it looks pretty good. I'm going to let it cool in a second. And then once it's cool, weigh it, and then I'm going to heat it another 5 minutes. But I'm pretty sure that I got all of it. But we'll do that little check. After the 5 minutes, if it's still too high, according to the test that they give in your lab book, then I'll have to do a third run. But I don't think that's going to happen. We'll see. Another thing about this, I'm using this wire gauze, this wire mesh here, rather than the clay triangle, mainly because it is so unstable that I'd say about 1 in 3 students drop their beakers using the clay triangle. I do it probably 1 in 5 times. So as funny as it is to watch, it does take a lot longer to get the lab done. So that's why I have this stable thing. The positive of the clay triangle, the reason to use is there's nothing in the way of the flame, so the beaker can get hotter. But this works just fine. We're going to weigh the beaker with the residue, they call it. This is should be mostly just sand and salt. Might be a little bit of ammonium chloride in it. And now students will ask, how do I know when it's cool enough to touch? Well, first, if you're ever in doubt, you can just put your fingers by it. If you feel heat coming off of it, it's too hot. But what I always do is just let it sit for 5 minutes, and you're guaranteed for a beaker, at least the top you should be able to touch. And then from there you can just see if it's okay. But this has been sitting almost for 10 minutes, and the bottom I feel is just slightly warm. But yeah, if you're really concerned, just let whatever you've heated up sit for 10 minutes. You're going to be fine. Okay, we'll put this in here. See what we have for the mass of the beaker and the residue after the first heating. So we're going to try another 5 minutes. And if I see any of the residue form on the beaker, I'll flame throw it off. Otherwise, we'll just let it go for 5 minutes and then cool it and then weigh it again. So the test from the lab book says that when we weigh out our sample, if it's under 69.499 grams, then we have to do a third heating, because we're going to assume that we had a lot of ammonium chloride left, and maybe there's still some in there. So let's do this. See what we get. 69.501. Awesome. So that's it. That's our second heating, and that's the last one we have to do. We're going to assume that in that sample is only salt and sand, and we can go on to the next step. So I added the 15 mils of water. I had the camera on for that, but then I messed up. I knocked the camera. So we'll just start from here. What we have is the salt and sand in the beaker. Now with 15 mils of water, that's going to dissolve the salt and leave the sand behind. Now I'm supposed to stir this for 3 minutes, so I will. I won't make you watch, so let me do that. Next, we're to weigh a piece of filter paper. 1.222 grams. And then we need to weigh an evaporating dish. It's 45.610 grams. So those are two masses we have to add into our report sheet. Next, we're going to filter out the sand and just leave behind the saltwater solution in the evaporating dish below there. So that's a long stem funnel. And then I'm going to put in a piece of filter paper, the one that we just weighed, wherever it is. All right, so when you're folding one of these, you just fold it in half. And then fold it again. Like that, and then if you see there's 4 sheets now. You just take 3 on one side, 1 on the other, and you open it up. Oops. Something like a coffee filter. And then when you put it in here, you can just zap it with a tiny little bit of water to hold it steady. Keep it from expanding out or popping out of there, and then it's all set to go. Next, we're going to add in this mixture here. The trick is that you want as little saltwater solution going through as possible, because we're going to have to evaporate that. So it takes a long time to do that, so we don't want to put a gallon of water behind this to wash it through. So what I'm going to do first is just swirl it and get as much of it in here as I can. And I'm going to use just a little bit. Oh man, I did not do a great job here. Okay, here we go. All right, not sterling, but I think I only add maybe 3 or 4 more mils. I see that it is dripping through, and it's going to take probably 3 or 4 minutes to do that. So we'll come back. So here's the filter paper after about 5 minutes. There's our salt water. That's our salt solution. And then this is some moist sand. And what I'm going to do is, I can do it while I'm holding the camera here, is going to wash through the filter paper and the sand, and that should get rid of any extra salt that was left behind. See, it's going through again. So I'll give that another 5 minutes, and then we're going to put the sand and filter paper into the oven, and then we're going to start evaporating off this massive amount of salt solution. Okay. All right, we're going to take the moist sand that's in the filter paper. The filter paper is also wet. Put that here, and oops, and because I'm holding this camera with one hand, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this up, and then I'll show you putting it into the oven. And here's the oven. Open this up. Got a few levels here, and here's the sample. Put that right in the center. Normally you'd put your initials on it in pencil before it got wet so you'd know whose is whose, but I think I'm pretty safe since there's no one else even on campus. All right, and then we'll let this sit in here for, it said I think it was 20 minutes, but I'll just let it go until I'm sure that it's dry. So we're heating up a beaker that's empty, and then on top is the evaporating dish with salt solution in there, and we're using the beaker to keep the heating under control until about 3/4 of that solution is gone. Once it drops down to about 1/4 of its volume, we're going to move this down. We'll get rid of the beaker and we'll just put it here and heat it. That'll hurry things along. So this first part will be a little bit slow, but it's steady. Won't have a big sputtering of the solution out. We don't want to lose any sample. Oops. Here's the solution after about 20 minutes, and well, maybe closer to a half an hour, but you can see the salt is forming on the sides. The water, or the solution, is steaming, and we're down to maybe 1/4 of what we had. You can see the little bubbles in the bottom. So I'm going to next let it cool a little bit so I can get a hold of it, and then I'm going to remove the beaker and put the evaporating dish on the wire mesh and complete the evaporation that way. Here's the sand out of the oven. Can't really tell if you're just looking at it, but the paper is very dry, and the sand is moving around really freely, so that's a good sign that it's nice and dry. So we'll weigh it now. Close it here. Okay, we're going to put the filter paper, 2.620 grams, and then we'll subtract off the filter paper to find out how much that sand weighs. I heated it up a couple of times, and then when I pulled away the last time, you can see that it's so hot it's just steaming away the last of the water. Don't really have anything that's sputtered out. You can see it's not really white. It looks like moist snow, right? It's a slushy. That means there's some water in there. So what we want to do is heat it up, and it should become very white. Oops, when all the water's gone and it's just the salt. You can see. And nearly there. Try one more time, then I'll have to focus on this so I don't send all the sample flying everywhere. You can see it's getting whiter, it's brighter and brighter, and that says the water is leaving the sample. So you might be able to hear it crackling. That's water trapped under the salt that's forming. Sounds like Rice Krispies. And yeah, it's nearly there. And the last data point is going to be the mass of the evaporating dish plus the dry salt. And with that, you have all the data you need to determine the percentages, the masses of each of the components and the percentage of each in your mixture.